I recently gave a talk at the Manchester Autism Show, and quite a few people asked if there was another way to see it. So I thought I'd make this recording. So I am Andy. I'm 27 years old. I'm autistic, and I'm the founder of Spectrum Gaming, a community for autistic young people. And the topic of the talk is from burnout to thriving. Um, yeah, I'll get straight into it. So for me, when I was younger, I struggled a lot. And the best analogy I can think of is that I felt like an alien quite a lot of the time. Where sort of when you're going through life or I was going through school, it felt like everyone had their lives together and everything was going really well. And then I was just there as a really like confused mess, not really sure what's going on, and then trying to like work things out, but not really getting it. And I found it really, really difficult. One example of this is that I was unfortunately quite badly bullied at school, so I was picked on quite a lot, and I really, really struggled as a result of it. As an autistic person, I also have sensory differences, so I really struggled with things at school like bright lights, and I really, really struggled to sit still. But I thought everyone struggled with those same things, so I was really confused around why other people didn't seem to struggle as much. Now that I'm older, I know that those things were part of being autistic, so I might struggle in ways that other people don't. And when I was younger, how school felt to me in a nutshell is the image on the right here, where there's sort of one way to learn, there's one way to sort of do things, and if you don't fit that, then you really, really struggle. And there's lots of people who are really brilliant in their own way, but school doesn't check for that, it only looks for one thing. Um, And the impact of that is I was what was known as a masker. So when I was in school, I spent lots and lots of energy trying my best to try and sort of like fit in and do what was expected. But I found this really, really hard. So what used to happen is I used all of my energy trying to like fit in at school. I got home from school and I just couldn't do anything anymore. And my mum used to ask how my day was, and I would just scream at her, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because I was just so exhausted from the school day. And I had this weird thing where I actually got good grades in school, so I was seen as a success. But at the same time, I didn't really have any meaningful friendships. I felt quite alone a lot of the time. I felt misunderstood by everyone, and it was actually a really, really difficult time. Um, that is what led to the picture on the bottom left here, which was an image made by a young person to talk about autistic burnout. I think the best way to talk about this, well, my favourite way to talk about it is, let's say you are a mage or a wizard in a video game, and the way that works is you have mana to cast spells. And if there was one slime that you had to fight, you could easily like use a fireball, then your mana will recharge and things will all be good. But like on this picture, if there are hundreds of slimes, you can keep trying to shoot fireballs at them, but your mana will run out, and you won't be able to take all of them. And if you continue to sort of fire spells because you need to do it to stay alive, but you're unable to, I think that's a really great description of burnout, where there's so much you're expected to do when you're trying to like fit in with people and pay attention in lessons and sort of cope with all the demands that are placed upon you. We have a limit for how much we're able to do. And when you reach that limit, but still keep trying to push through, that's when you reach that point of burnout. Another example I think of is if people do exercise. So if someone's a runner, if you run a lot, it's really important to then have time to recover after that run. If you don't and you keep trying to run, you'll then get an injury. But then if you're told you're injured, but you still have to run, and then you still keep going, things will get even more difficult to the point where you won't be able to walk or do much movement for a very long time. And I think you see this. This is what happened to me, but a lot of young people experience this too, where you might be going to school, it might be feeling really difficult, so it feels like you need a break from it. But when everyone says, "Oh, you need to get back into school, we need to sort of focus on it as much as possible," but what you might actually need at that time is time to rest and recover and recuperate, and trying to do that when your mana hasn't recharged can make things worse. So I reached burnout when I was at university. So I was normally very academic, so I did well in exams. But I got to this point where I was trying my best to sort of fit in, and to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. So I had around 3 months when I didn't really leave the house. I stayed in my room until my housemates were asleep. Went to a local spa to get food. What and then sort of did that every single day. And it was a really, really, really difficult time. And it was actually at this point when I was diagnosed as autistic, as well as being diagnosed with severe anxiety and severe depression. Because we have this weird thing where you don't know you're autistic from the start. You only get assessed for autism when you're struggling. And it's a really, really silly thing. I wish it was changed so that people knew they were autistic and that it's okay to be autistic from an early age. I think that's what we really, really need. So I reached burnout. I was struggling to leave the house. I was struggling to interact much with people. But then over time, I started to recover from burnout. Um, I would say this was really, really difficult. It was quite a slow process, but it's also a very, very unfair one. I know lots of young people who've reached that point of burnout, and I think it is so unjust that it happens to so many of us just because we are autistic, because we sort of because the world isn't built for autistic people, it's built for the majority, and that's a really, really frustrating thing. But there are some things that helped me on my journey. When I was 13, I made my first ever friend, and I made them online. So at this time, I didn't have any friends. I was in real life. I was picked on quite a lot. I felt really misunderstood, but I had a few friends in an online space where I could talk to them, and we could have meaningful conversations, and I felt listened to and cared about. And I didn't really get that in real life, so that was really important for me. I made my first face-to-face friend when I was 14, and he didn't speak English, so we had just played football every day, which is still really epic. But yeah. Um, my second thing is there's a place called Fanboy Free in Manchester, and after my diagnosis, I set up a board game group for autistic people. And this was the first time in my life where I felt truly like understood. Because what used to happen is I was referred for counselling and CBT, and I explained something I was struggling with, and then I had to explain why it was difficult in the context of being autistic. And people didn't always get it. Whereas when I went to this board game meetup, I could go downstairs, have a bit of a rant, and then everyone just got it and understood. And that was the first time I felt really, really connected with a lot of people. So that was really important. Um, and the third thing here is Autistic Pride. This was the first Autistic Pride event I went to, and you can actually see me right here. I was actually sat. I'm trying to work out. Yeah, I was actually sat on the grass on my Switch, connected to my phone hotspot, playing Fortnite. And that was the first time I was in a really big space with lots of autistic people, and it was okay for me to do that. Yeah, so that was really, really awesome. And those things all helped me to get to where I am now, where I have had lots of difficult experiences, but now I can say that I'm doing really well. And as a result of this, I have learned a few things that I really wanted to share with everyone. The first one, the difficulties you've experienced are not permanent. As I said earlier, when you're sort of assessed for autism, you're rarely just autistic. You get to a point where you've had so many difficulties. People also have traits of anxiety, depression, trauma, and lots of other things. And then you have this really frustrating thing where no one tells you what autism is, so that you think all of those things are autism, but they're not. And there's so many things I hear young people say which they really struggle with, and they think it'll be like that forever, but it won't be. So I've got a list here. So anxiety, depression, trauma, anger, burnout, struggling to trust people, and other things are not autism, even if they feel like they might be right now, even if some professionals you meet might say that they are not. When I first went into burnout, I had a CBT with a therapist, and I managed to convince them that I would have severe anxiety and that I would struggle to leave the house every day for the rest of my whole life. And I just thought, like, professionals are the people who are supposed to know that, like, that's not the case and what autism actually is. But a lot of people tend to not really have a clue. But I can say now, I know that how I felt then wasn't going to be forever. And actually, when you've recovered from the difficult experiences you've had, autism in itself actually is pretty cool. So here's a quote from Autistic Not Weird, which I love, so I'll read it out. It says, I'm autistic, which means everyone around me has a disorder that makes them say things they don't mean, not care about structure, fail to hyperfocus on singular important topics, have unreliable memories, drop weird hints, and creepily stare into my eyeballs. So why do people say you're the weird one? Because there's more of them than me. And I think that's really, really true. Um, yeah. The next one is everyone's weird. Some people just hide it better. And one thing which I've noticed a lot is like everyone is really focused on this idea of normal. So like you go to school, you get good grades, you work a 9 to 5 job. Every evening you watch a bit of boring TV, like a soap or whatever it is people watch. You might have a holiday booked sort of like once a year or once every couple of years, and this is the life that we're told we should aspire towards. And one thing I think a lot about is like, what's so special about that? It actually sounds like pretty boring. Why is this sort of this the ideal thing? Is that what happiness like really is? And as I've got older, one thing that I've learned is actually it isn't just autistic people, but every single person on the planet has learned to hide parts of themselves and what makes them who they are. Like there's so much of focus on this idea of normal that everyone hides a bit of their weirdness. And it's this I don't it's really confusing and a bit baffling and really silly because, it just means that the world's a bit more of like a less happy place, and it would be epic if that was fixed in some way. And I guess what I wanted to say here is being your authentic self is perfectly okay. I think being openly weird and authentic is a very brave choice to make, but it's also a very, very wonderful one. And I think that some of the greatest people I've met are the people who are okay with doing that. Though I do have to say here that some of us don't really have much of a choice with that. Because, like I said, I went through autistic burnout, as quite a few people have. When you've gone through burnout, what that means is you've tried your best to sort of like fit in and do this idea of normal, but it hasn't worked out. And that means you've got no other choice but to do things differently. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, one of the things which helped me a lot and really changed things for me was that recognition that being autistic means I have to live a life that's very different to most people, but that life can still be a very, very happy one. And once I had that idea, things started to change much and became much better for me. And yeah, but it would be epic if that was a choice rather than doing it because I have had to struggle so much. Um, there's also a picture of a canary on my screen, because I love an analogy called canary in the mines, and it's normally used when it comes to education, but I think it's relevant here too. So in some places, I don't know if you still do it, when miners go coal mining, they take a canary in with them in a little cage, and what happened, and the reason for this is canaries have quite small lungs. So if there are any poisonous gases in the caves, the canary would unfortunately die, and this was a sign to the miners that it's not safe and they need to get out of there. And I think this analogy is important because for me, the canaries are the people who are struggling to attend school or who have gone into burnout, and those things. What it isn't saying like we're wrong or we're broken. It's the system as a whole is broken. Everyone's focused on this rubbish idea of normal. In school, there's only one way to learn and do things. If that isn't working for you, then it doesn't mean that you're not the problem. It's a sign that the whole system isn't working. It just impacts on some people more than others. 'Cause again, I don't think anyone wants to just live a life that's really boring and plain every day, but they feel, yeah, I don't know. Let's just be cooler. I don't know. Earlier on, I shared a graphic from Hannah, a young person in Spectrum Gaming, and I wanted to read out the rationale behind what she made because I think it's very beautiful. She says, "This drawing is called Facade and it represents masking. Me and many other autistic people feel like we need to camouflage to fit in with our surroundings, just like the leaf insect. But it's important for us to know we are incredible just the way we are. We are the colour and the difference that the world needs." Yeah, I like that a lot. The next point. Is it's okay to advocate for what you need. But I also wanted to say this can be very difficult at times because what tends to happen is you get your diagnosis and then no one blooming tells you what autism is. So it can be quite a confusing thing. And there's this quote from Harry Potter. Credit for this quote talking about it here is Chris from Autistic Not Weird again because he made a great meme about it. But the quote says, it's Harry saying to Dumbledore, even if a stone's gone, I mean, you know who, and then Dumbledore says, call him Voldemort, Harry. Always use the real name for things. Fear of a name increases fear of a thing itself. And I think a lot about this when it comes to autism, because autism in itself is like, it's okay to talk about, like, but then because no one ever mentions it, it becomes this big, scary, unknown, like hideous thing, and it doesn't really make any sense. Because once you understand what it is, it's not scary whatsoever. Like it's the name for the way your brain works, and that's perfectly okay. And yeah, it's just really annoying that people don't talk about it more. To help with this, we have actually made a website called Autism Understood. So it's a website about autism for autistic young people, which has lots and lots and lots of content for understanding it. So I really recommend looking at that if you get the chance. When it comes to, because once you understand yourself, then it's easier to sort of advocate for what you need. And at the same time as this, I think there's two important things when it comes to advocating for your needs. The first one is that you know there's, in some areas and in some spaces, this might sound quite blunt, but I think it's not always really worth it. I always think there's three types of people, and the first one is there's people you can connect with who might just get you, and you get on really well, and things are really smooth when you're together. Obviously, not all the time. People have misunderstandings and fallouts, but overall, that's how it works. The second group of people are people who might not understand you very well, but they're very open to listening and learning and reflecting on what they do, and I think they're really epic people as well. The third group, which are on the screen, are what I call poo poo heads. And these are the people who are just ignorant, poopy butt farts and like might not ever get things and they might not even try. And then what I want to say to you here is there are poo poo heads in the world, and if you come across them and they don't understand you and they don't try to understand you, it's okay to like not associate with them and chuck them in the bin, like not literally but like, I don't know. Yeah, you get my point. Some people might never understand, and it's just not worth your time and energy being around those people. I think understanding of autism is increasing, but there are still some people who just don't get it, and that's okay. It's not your fault. They're the plonkers, not you. Um, the third picture here is a garlic with an orange slice in it, and I wanted to include this to say it's really important to not just focus on fitting in, and it's about finding a place in the community that works for you as an individual. One example for me is I've tried 7 different running clubs until I found one that works for me. Some made me really uncomfortable, some just weren't right for me as an individual. The one that I then went to, it's okay for me to go and talk to people if I want to, but if I'm really struggling or really stressed, I can just stand in the corner and people will leave me in peace. And that was perfect. It worked really well. There's certain cafes that I go to where I feel comfortable and safe. And it's the same with people. You don't have to be around people if you don't get on well with them. It's focus on the people who you do connect with and who you feel you belong with. Rather than just people who might mistreat you or misunderstand you or make you feel rubbish, because that's not fair. Yeah. The next point is focus on your strengths. Going back to the major example I gave earlier, one thing that tends to happen is when you're in certain systems, for example, a school might not focus on the skills that a mage has. So it might not focus on learning magic and learning like new spells. It might focus on the needs of warriors, learning about sword fighting and holding shields and that sort of stuff. So that's really great for people who are sword fighters. But if you are a mage and are really epic at what you do, you will feel like a failure if you're trying to learn these sword fighting skills when they're not suited towards you. And this is what a lot of things are like. Every single person on the entire planet has their own unique strengths and things that they're good at, and it's really really important to focus on them, because otherwise you're going to feel like you're not good enough, and that is unfortunately how some people feel as a result of the things they've experienced. What I did want to say with this is this gets much, much easier when you're older. When you are an adult, you have much more autonomy, so you can follow your passions and your interests. When I was younger, there was so much I had to learn about and I had to do, which I had no interest in whatsoever. And now running Spectrum Gaming and doing something that I love and which I get a lot of sort of happiness out of, and it's focused on things that I'm actually good at, rather than, what tends to happen when you have an autism diagnosis is people tend to focus on just fixing your struggles, and sometimes they completely forget all the epic strengths that you have. You You might know what they are, you might not know what they are yet, but every single person on the planet has their own strengths. Um, one thing that's important here is a lot of autistic people have special interests. So interests which you care a lot about and focus a lot on. And focusing on them can be really, really epic. And the second thing here, as I sort of touched on, is this is a bit about sort of unlearning the messages you get. Again, this idea of you have to be normal, you have to fit into this box. Like, just set the box on fire or something. I don't know. Like, we don't need it. And focus on you. And yeah, and I've also written here level up the right skills. So again, it's that thing of if you're a mage, why focus on leveling up your sword fighting skills when you can focus on leveling up your magic skills and learn 50 spells and then become a really, really epic mage rather than still struggling to hold a sword years later. But yeah, I hope that analogy made sense. And final point here is remember there are a lot of us. There are so many autistic people who in all walks of life. So there is Sam Holness, who's a world record holding triathlete. Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon. The current world's strongest man, Tom Stoltman, is autistic. And Boy with Ook is a very well known musician who's autistic too. There are autistic teachers, psychologists, actors, musicians, doctors. But I also wanted to say here, it's not just about being like someone who's like famous or does some good thing in the world. What I'm trying to say here is there are lots of autistic people who are doing what they love and they're very happy doing that. You don't need to be some sort of like special person. What matters is like you can live a happy life as an autistic person, and there are a lot of us who are in the world who are doing well. And yeah, that was it. Thank you very, very much for listening. Um yeah, and goodbye.